Good Wednesday afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandajis here with your tropical update on what is now major hurricane Category 4 status, Laura, that is bearing down on the Texas and Louisiana Gulf coasts within the next 12 hours. Today is Wednesday, August 26, 2020. Let's get right to it here. Laura up to a Category 4 storm on our list, 13th named storm of the year. And when you look at hurricanes, major hurricanes overall, we typically see our first of the season right around September 4th. So we're coming in 9 days ahead of time in terms of climatology here when you look at an average Atlantic season from 1966 to 2009. Here's the latest satellite imagery with the latest advisory criteria on it too. Going off the 2 o'clock advisory, winds now are sustained at 140 miles per hour with gusts to 155. It's moving at a pretty good pace too, northwest at 16 miles an hour, and that central pressure is 952. It is very impressive looking here on satellite imagery, and with those winds at 140, we are firmly in a Category 4 status with ranges from 130 to 156 miles per hour when we look at the Saffir-Simpson scale, rating hurricanes based on wind speed. Now, here's the forecast track. There hasn't been many changes with this. We're looking at a landfall somewhere right around the Louisiana-Texas state lines, right around midnight or just after midnight tonight before it moves inland, pretty much moving up along the Sabine River and weakening as it moves over land. But strengthening likely to continue before it even makes landfall. Right now at a Category 4, it could strengthen further. That is, if just a few factors don't come into play that we're going to talk about in a second. And overall, the track, even looking farther out in the future, yeah, it moves north, and then it'll be picked up by westerly winds aloft and pushed off towards the east. And that is going to bring some rainfall into the mid-Atlantic region, perhaps even some gusty winds by this weekend. All right, rapid intensification. Laura has achieved and exceeded the threshold for rapid intensification, and based from the National Hurricane Center, you need an increase of the sustained maximum winds of at least 30 knots, 35 miles per hour in 24 hours. When we look back at the past advisories over the last 24 hours, we start off at 1 p.m. yesterday, where it had winds sustained of 75. 1 p.m. today, sustained winds of 140. That's an increase of 65 miles per hour, and a big drop in pressure too. 990 yesterday, 952, a drop of 38 millibars in 24 hours. The storm has literally bombed out and rapidly intensified. So it's a strong system. Is there any hope for this to weaken before it moves over land? There is, but it's really a long shot. There are two things that could come into play here that either levels off the intensity or weakens it just slightly ahead of landfall, and we're looking for a slight increase in wind shear. Remember, wind shear is a change in speed and direction as you get farther up in the sky. Now, a vertically built engine like a hurricane is, when you get stronger winds aloft, that tends to dislocate the strong convection or thunderstorm activity from the center, kind of blowing off the tops of the storms. That could happen as this gets closer to land later tonight. Also, with a very intense system like we have with Laura, something called an eye wall replacement cycle occurs, an ERC. And what this is basically is the eye, which is already pretty small, gets eaten up or choked out from a larger eye wall that'll build into or replace it. So typically this leads to short-term weakening, but if it was over the Gulf for longer than, say, the next 12 hours, it would lead to actually more strengthening in the long run. But thankfully, this time scale here before landfall, it would likely weaken it or at least plateau its strength as it moves towards land. Here's how it looks on visible satellite imagery. I mean, just a textbook-looking structure for a very strong hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. In fact, being with winds 140 miles per hour and that deep central pressure, it is now the strongest hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico since Katrina back in 2005. Here's a look at Laura's 24-hour evolution. Yesterday, it was a low-grade Category 1 storm. Today, a high-end Category 4 powerhouse. You can see it there, and in the last couple of hours or frames, you see that eye really building in there and being prominent in the last couple of frames, clearing on out. In fact, let's get a closer look of what's going on with that visible satellite imagery. It'll pop up here in just a second, again with winds of 140 miles an hour, with gusts up to around 155. There's that image right there. You can see that eye filling on in there. It's got about a 25 nautical mile diameter. And overall, when you look at past hurricanes, the average eye width is around 20 to 40 miles wide on average. Now, a smaller eye does lead to stronger winds. You think about it kind of wrapping on up. Think about it this way. An ice skater, okay, spinning with their arms out. You got a bigger area to cover, right? But when you take your arms in, you're spinning faster. Same kind of thing here, the conservation of angular momentum with a hurricane. The tighter the spin, the faster it moves. So we could see a stronger eye here leading to, or a smaller eye, I should say, leading to stronger winds. Something else really kind of cool here we can nerd out for a second is when we look closely on the high-resolution imagery of the eye of Laura. You see there the spins within the eye. These are called eye mesovortices. And typically what this does is that these spin up in very intense hurricanes, and they actually lead to some stronger winds within the eye wall. Now, the eye wall is always going to be where you find the strongest winds in a hurricane, but these actually help tick those up just a little bit when they are present, which they are now. And it's typically also common in periods of intensification like we have been seeing. Here's the infrared. This really tells a story of a strong hurricane, okay? We use this to show the cloud top temperatures of thunderstorms. The colder the cloud tops, the stronger they are. So when we're looking at the shades of black and the shades of white, like we're seeing here, this is extremely intense thunderstorm activity wrapped all the way around that center, which is also why you're going to see the strongest winds in that eye wall there and the bands that kind of shoot out from it. Water vapor imagery, again, very impressive looking system here with that pronounced eye as it's lifting off towards the west-northwest, headed towards the coastline of the United States. It's about under 200 miles away now, and it's moving at around 16 miles per hour, so we can expect that landfall coming on in here around midnight or just thereafter, with some of the heaviest winds arriving ahead of time, again, just ahead of that eye, moving completely over land. Really here, the water temperatures, again, we've talked about this every single day in these past videos, not going to do anything to slow it down. We got plenty of warm water here, and it does extend down to a depth. So even though we are having like 20, 25-foot seas mixing things up, upwelling, not really going to do much to slow it down. Again, just the increase in wind shear and potentially there that eye wall replacement cycle doing a little bit to maybe take some edge off of those top winds. That's about it. We're not looking at a kind of collapse of the storm like we saw with Marco just a few days ago, thanks to that big-time increase of wind shear. Here's a look at radar from Lake Charles, Louisiana. The National Weather Service actually evacuated their Weather Service office there. All the duties have been sent over to areas out in Texas to handle the forecast here. We'll see if radar actually stays up throughout this entire system with some of these strongest bands and strongest winds headed in that general direction there. Here's a look at the overall wind field with Laura. It is quite large. Hurricane Hunter aircraft was finding tropical storm force winds extending out 150 miles from the center. That's winds of 39 miles per hour or greater. And you're finding hurricane force winds 75 miles per hour or greater, extending out about 60 miles from the center. If you're wondering what this orange bubble is, that's about winds of like 55 to 60 miles per hour. And that's extending out just a little bit further, probably upwards of around 100 miles or so from the center of Laura. You're going to find the strongest winds on the front right quadrant, okay, relative to its movement. So in this area here, the northeast quadrant relative to its movement forward, because you have to factor in that forward speed of 16 miles per hour. So it's moving that fast on top of winds gusting to 155 miles an hour. So you add 16 miles per hour or so to that, and they get even stronger. So you're going to find the strongest winds, the dirty side, to the right front quadrant of those storms as they move on land. Here's a look at some wind gusts so far. Again, nothing terrible on land out there, at least right now. 25 miles per hour recently out in Galveston, Houston 32. We have some buoy data, but notice none of them are located really close to any of the strongest winds associated with Laura right now. Seeing some peak winds of around 36 miles per hour. But something to note on here, you also see the wave heights. 10-foot wave heights there, 16-foot wave heights out there, and nothing coming in off of that buoy well off to the south and southeast. So what can we expect with impacts with Laura? Catastrophic storm surge expected. I can't stress this enough that some of this storm surge, it's expected to get up to 20 feet. That's a two-story building, a wall of water coming straight at you. And in some cases, this can extend about 30 miles inland, all the way up to the I-10 corridor through a good chunk of Louisiana. On top of that, flooding rainfalls, damaging winds, widespread power outages, and of course still the tornado risk. Let's start out with a life-threatening storm surge occurring out ahead of landfall. Worst will be on the east side of the storm with the winds blowing onshore, up to 20 foot of surge expected. and a very dangerous situation overall. Storm surge warnings are now flying across the entire coastline of Louisiana and into Texas as the Category 4 Laura pushes those winds, those waves, that water all up onto the low-lying areas, leading to significant inundation. Some of the wording from the National Hurricane Center has been absolutely spine-chilling. They said this is an unsurvivable event if you do stay in these areas that are expecting 15 to 20-foot storm surge. It's going to produce catastrophic damage in these areas that are low-lying, potentially extending all the way up to the I-10 corridor there. Just take a look at that peak storm surge forecast. I mean, it's just been going upwards from here up to 20 feet. That's unfathomable to see a two-story wall of water coming your way. Freshwater flooding out there as well on top of storm surge. Rainfall from the squalls coming on through, 6 to 10 inches of rainfall possible, and flash flooding is likely there. Here's a look at model data in terms of some of the rainfall totals. We'll look at the GFS first, 10 plus inches out in the Lake Charles area. The European now is very similar. Yesterday it was a little bit farther off to the west, but still right along the Sabine River Valley, 6 to 10 inches also there. Damaging winds too. A large wind field as we just saw. Tropical storm force winds at landfall expected to be out 150 miles. Hurricane force out 60 miles with forecast gusts up and over 130 miles an hour. Here's a look at winds out there right now. Sustained winds, nothing too terrible, under 20 miles an hour, and gusts up to 25 or so presently. But it's going to get worse, and a whole lot worse. European model forecast wind gusts here will start things off at 2:45 this afternoon. We'll progress into late afternoon, early evening. Winds get stronger. We're up over tropical storm force gusts here by 8 p.m. this evening. And then overnight tonight, they only get stronger. 76-mile-per-hour wind to Cameron Parish. And look at these gusts as we head through the middle of the night into early Thursday morning. Several areas, Orange, Port Arthur, and Cameron, up and over easily 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts as the storm moves onshore and lifts north. The winds will start to die down, but still extremely windy by Thursday morning. And by the lunch hour, we'll start to see things wind down. Still a breezy afternoon out there, shifting that wind direction as well. 20, 25, 30 miles per hour still, even into the afternoon hours. On top of all this, the risk is there for tornadoes. Tropical systems already introduced the spin into the atmosphere, makes it a little bit easier to spin up tornadoes. Right now, the Storm Prediction Center has most of Louisiana under a level 2 slight risk for tornadic cells, and you typically find this also in the front right quadrant of the system as it moves on in. It has the winds coming on up, they encounter the land friction, adds that spin into the atmosphere, and can easily spin up some of those tornadoes out there. Typically, they are short-lived and on the weaker side, but it can't be ruled out that some of them could be certainly strong. All right, that's the latest on today's video. Next time we talk is going to be post-landfall with Laura. We'll watch this extremely carefully, and it is a life-threatening situation here for people in Louisiana and Texas, and even farther inland as those flooding rains push north. If you have any questions on the system, don't be afraid to ask. If you have family or friends down in that area, you want to know the forecast in a little more detail, shoot me a message on Facebook, on Instagram, or on Twitter. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.